Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Wednesdays at 1 and our continuing saga in the story of Genesis, the beginnings of the people of Israel and their stories. We talked about a couple of weeks ago when we got into the history, which begins at Genesis 12, that we are now into recorded history. We have some people here who we know historically existed, lived, died, and did all that stuff in between. So it's getting real. So that's where we're going today, starting with Genesis 18. So if you don't have your Bible, now would be a good time to go and grab a Bible and turn to the Genesis, the 18th chapter. I was lighting the candle before, which I light always before I do a class or a worship service. And just like we light candles on the altar to begin our worship, I light a candle before teach a class or do my devotions in the morning. We were just sitting at our staff table, and Megan said, "I'm asking the kids to acolyte in their home worship." And she said, "Tell me again why we light candles to start worship." So here's just a reminder for you. We do that because Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the light no darkness shall overcome. So we light the candle to remind us of the light of Christ among us and with us in all that we do and all that we say as we go through this study of Scripture. So let us begin for this morning or this afternoon on this coolish afternoon here in Kansas, and welcome in all who are watching YouTube or Facebook or on our website. You are welcome, and we're glad you're here. So let's bow our heads in prayer. Gracious God, you called Abraham and Sarah out of the land that they knew, a land with which they were familiar. You asked them to come and start a whole new life, a life that was focused on you and your leading. And in some ways, we are in that same situation as we move through this time of stay at home. We are listening for your calling. We are listening for discernment and for the next steps. So we thank you for being with us to guide us in this call. We ask that you would continue to open up our eyes and our hearts and our minds to things that we may not have seen before, and that today will be the day that we will see something new. So we thank you again for giving us the story, a story that points to you through your Son, Jesus Christ, and the community that Christ called to you. We pray in his name. Amen. So, as is my practice here, the way we start is I'm going to read a little section and then make some comments on it. And as I'm reading, if you have a question or a comment that you would like to make, go ahead and post that right away. And then when I'm looking up between the readings, I'll be able to tell if you have a question that I can address or just a curiosity. It's harder to do the questions on this kind of format, but I know you have them, and don't feel silly about listing any question or any comment that you want, because there are other people out there who I'm sure are having the same question or would like to make the comment and just don't have the nerve. So go out there and put down your questions, and let's have some conversation. So beginning in Genesis 18 at the first verse. The Lord appeared to Abraham by the oaks of Mamre, as he sat at the entrance of his tent in the heat of the day. He looked up and saw 3 men standing near him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent entrance to meet them and bowed down to the ground. He said, "My Lord, if I have found favor with you, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought, and wash your feet, and rest yourselves under the tree. Let me bring a little bread, that you may refresh yourselves, and after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." So they said, "Do as you have said." And Abraham hastened into the tent to Sarah and said, "Make ready quickly 3 measures of choice flour, knead it, and make cakes." Abraham ran to the herd and took a calf, tender and good, and gave it to the servant, who hastened to prepare it. Then he took curds and milk and the calf that he had prepared, and set it before them, and he stood by them under the tree while they ate. They said to him, "Where is your wife, Sarah?" And he said, "There, in the tent." Then one said, "I will surely return to you in due season, and your wife Sarah shall have a son." And Sarah was listening at the tent entrance behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "Have I grown old, and my husband is old, and I shall still have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a child now that I am old?' Is anything too wonderful for the Lord? At the set time, I will return to you in due season, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "Oh, yes, you did." Okay. So let's talk a little bit about some of the things that appear here in this story and some questions that may be coming up in your minds. Um, I think we started talking last time about the switch here. We had just had a visitation where God and Abraham talked about the wife and the bearing of a child in old age. And in the story that just ended at the end of 17, we got a lot of the same information, only that information that was in the Yahwist account, the J account, where God is called Jehovah or God. That strand is very much the conversations between God and Abram. And it's a personal interchange between the two of them. God establishes the covenant with him. There's a ritual action, so we see the influence of the priestly strand, and then we have Abram and Sarah getting their names changed. So when we start in chapter 18, where I just started today, now we see that it is the Lord who is appearing. We're not naming the Lord God. So this is the Elohist strand. This is a different author telling similar story about Abraham and Sarah and how they are to proceed to get this son that God has promised. So the stories are interlocked. They reflect a number of same sorts of things, but there's just pieces of information that come from both of them that kind of put together we get the story. So it's like two different accounts. Again, we had two different accounts of creation. We had two different accounts, partial accounts in the Noah story, and now we're seeing the two separate strands of authorship right next to each other. Some people would say this is just a clarification. Some people wouldn't even notice. It would just seem sort of repetitive, so that as we move ahead, you can be a little more aware of that. Let's see, Pam's got something here. I guess there is no semblance of time if Abraham and Sarah are able to bake bread and roast a calf in such a short time. And they had a microwave. Didn't you know that? They bought it when the last caravan came through. They bought that microwave, and it was the best thing that ever happened to them. No, it is true. This is, and this is kind of where you can see the author exaggerating. And basically, what we're seeing here is the first point that I wanted to make in that Abraham and Sarah, this is a turning point. They are now out again at the Oaks of Mamre, a little bit distant from where we found them last time. And he sees these three travelers who are coming towards him. And instead of running into the tent and saying, pack up the babies and let's run, here comes some strangers. He sees these travelers as people for whom he can provide hospitality. This runs deep in ancient Near East, and it continues to this day through the people of Israel and people of the Middle East who are just, that is the way they are stuck together, is with this part of them that just must provide hospitality. It's a wonderful It's a wonderful way to be. So we have here, first of all, he asks if they will stop, don't pass by, and he brings water first to wash their feet, and then he tells them to rest, and he brings them a little bit of bread. So he says, I'll bring you some bread. So he goes, and I can see Sarah making some pats of bread fairly quickly. If she had some measures of flour ready for that kind of thing, she would just have to mix them and put them on a griddle. um, but the calf is kind of over and above. So it's like Abraham is so excited to have company. He doesn't throw all of the process on Sarah, which I think is a nice thing. She does the cakes, which is the easiest part of this meal, and then goes to a servant who is tending the herd, who's going to prepare this calf. And then the curds and the milk that go with that would all have been that servant's job. But it's like he went head over heels. I mean, he just went way out of his way to provide some food and some rest for these travelers. And so, sort of by way of repaying him for his kindness, or perhaps this was the destination of the journey of these three travelers. And if you want to think of this in terms of this may be representation of the Godhead, of the Trinity, that there were three travelers, and one is speaking, kind of prophesying to them, asks where Sarah is. She's in the tent, and then says, to Abraham, I'm really gonna, I'm gonna come back, and by the time I come back in due season, Sarah will have a son. And of course, she's been eavesdropping at the entrance of the tent, and she just basically laughs. She's really, it says she laughed to herself. So this is, kind of under her breath. She's thinking, she basically, it says, cease to be with Sarah after the manner of women. That is a way of referring to the fact that her cycles have ended, that she's no longer having menopause, or that she's past, and that she's in menopause, that she's past childbearing years. So she says, how is that? Like Mary, how can this be? How is this going to happen? The way we know that this happens isn't possible. So how can this happen? So Sarah laughs, and then the traveler says, is anything too wonderful for the Lord? And then he reiterates that he will return in due season and she will have a son. So then she gets embarrassed that she has laughed, because this is the desire of her heart. This is the one thing that she has not yet had and not been able to provide. And now it looks as if her time is over to provide that child. Um, and so they say, yeah, you did laugh. And the laughing is a wonderful reaction to this wonderful gift that God is going to bestow upon you. So that wonderful little encounter with, the hospitality of Abraham and Sarah, who are just minding their own business out in the heat of the day, and they invite these travelers in and give them good hospitality. And then there is this wonderful news that comes to them. Might Abraham have known that it was God? One might suspect. It's interesting because of this author does not have I keep saying Abraham and God in quite the same kind of face-to-face relationship that the Yahwist does in the writings of the Yahwist. The Elohist is the Lord, a little more distant, a little more masked, not quite clear, the same clarity that there is. So we see that, yes, I think if the Elohist had written this part of the story, he would have recognized God right away, because they were buds, they had this relationship already going. Okay, anything, okay, I don't see anything else cooking here, so let me continue. This is chapter 18 at verse 16. Then the men set out from there, and they looked toward Sodom. And Abraham went with them to set them on their way. The Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Seeing that Abraham shall become a great and mighty nation, and all the nations of the earth shall be blessed in him. No, for I have chosen him, that he may charge his children and his household after him, to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, How great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave their sin! I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me. And if not, I will know. Okay, I just want to pause a minute here on this because we have moved from the three men who have, without even skipping a beat, we have moved into the center of these three men, and as if we are now in the mind of God, listening to God's thoughts. The Lord says, are we to take this as the Lord is outside of these three men, or, they are hearing him talk, or how is this conversation that we're going to be privy to? How is this unfolding? And Abraham is there. So is this something he's hearing, or is this just an inner dialogue between the persons of the Trinity? But regardless, the question is, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Because he's going to become a great nation, and all the nations will be blessed by him. So he's got work to do. He has a plan, he has a covenant, he has a mission and a calling. And so why should I bother him with what he's planning on doing? And he decides no, because he has chosen him, and his job is going to be to charge his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord, and by being blessed, bless the nations. And then the interesting little line here, he says, Then the Lord says, How great is the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah, and how very grave their sin. You kind of wonder, like, oh, okay, and where did this outcry come from? We haven't talked about Sodom and Gomorrah between Abraham and the three men. You kind of wonder, what is this outcry? So is this an outcry of prayer, that people have continued to pray over Sodom and Gomorrah, and hopefully that they will be delivered from the sinfulness of their actions? And we don't know that. This is all kind of nebulous in how this information gets transferred. But the interesting turn of phrase is, I must go down and see whether they have done altogether according to the outcry that has come to me, and if not, I will know. So God doesn't seem to have a plan here other than he's going to go and look. He's going to go and find out what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah. He's not, just because people have, shared with him this outcry about what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, God does not just instantly take that word and then plan to come down and, fire and brimstone falling upon Sodom and Gomorrah. So there is a chance that Sodom and Gomorrah might actually be redeemed in God's eyes. And so let's see what happens when he goes down. So the men turned from there and went toward Sodom, while Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Did you notice that? Now we have the Lord and Abraham and the men who have left. Okay, now this is interesting. Then Abraham came near and said, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? And you kind of wonder, okay, how does Abraham just immediately jumps to the fact that if he's realizing the power of this character that is now here called Lord, or these men who have come along with the Lord, he immediately assumes that God is there to punish the sinfulness of Sodom and Gomorrah. So Abraham comes near and says, Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? So his concern is that there are righteous people who are getting caught up in the ugliness of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they will be unjustly punished. And then we have the great barter. Peggy says, Might it have been outcry from Lot? It's possible. Yes, that is possible. At that point, Lot is living in that area, so that is possible. And then, Peggy, good rule of management, check all aspects before coming to a conclusion. Yeah. Doesn't it nice when the divinity that you worship plays by those rules that you can understand? I like that. So here's the great barter between God and Abraham. Abraham once more came near and said, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked? Suppose there are 50 righteous within the city. Will you then sweep away the place and not forgive it for the 50 righteous who are in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to slay the righteous with the wicked, so that the righteous fare as the wicked. Far be that from you. Shall not the judge of all the earth do what is just?" And the Lord said, "If I find at Sodom 50 righteous in the city, I will forgive the whole place for their sake." Abraham answered, "Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. Suppose 5 of the 50 righteous are lacking. Will you destroy the whole city for the lack of 5? And he said, "I will not destroy it if I find 45 there." Again he spoke to him, "Suppose 40 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 40, I will not do it." Then he said, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak. Suppose 30 are found there." And he answered, "I will not do it if I find 30 there." He said, "Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord. Suppose 20 are found there." And he answered, "For the sake of 20, I will not destroy it." Then he said, "Oh, do not let the Lord be angry if I speak just once more. Suppose 10 are found there." He answered, "For the sake of 10, I will not destroy it." And the Lord went his way when he had finished speaking to Abraham, and Abraham returned to his place. Okay, so a couple of things going on here that I think are really fascinating. And you remember earlier on we talked about that we started with the number of 3, and we started to enrich that number in its numerology in earlier stories when there were 3 of this or 3 of that. And I told you that we're going to start seeing other numbers and that being imbued with significance. So here we have that the number of people that allow God to save the city of Sodom and Gomorrah was 10. And we've talked before how 10 is the number of a minyan, and a minyan is what is required for the beginning of a synagogue. So if there are 10 righteous, we've got a synagogue. And so we have a group of people who are worshiping, a worshiping community. So for the sake of the worshiping community, we will save the entire town. Wow, kind of puts a little pressure on the worshiping communities, if the whole area is being saved because of you, better not lose anybody and better continue to be faithful. But I like the idea that Abraham here now is almost turning into the assumption of the role that he had in the other account, that where he is comfortable talking face to face to God, comfortable negotiating with God, trying to talk him in or persuade him to do something other than what God has said he will do. And I also love the fact that there are these little phrases that tell us that this is almost a worshipful dance. That it's almost not, I don't want to say it's sarcastic, but um, Abraham starts out by basically saying, "Aren't you the judge of the universe?" Well, the judge of the universe needs to be just. So why would you destroy innocent people along with the wicked people? And that's kind of the bottom question, which I can imagine was some of the seedbed for the theodicy question, which is, if God is a good God, why do little children die? Why do innocent children die? Um, and here's the beginning of that. It's like, so if you're the judge of the universe, how come you're not even thinking in a way that would be just? What would be the just deserts of this community that has both evil and good in it? So he's kind of, putting him back in his place and holding God accountable for the role of being the judge. And then I like this, where Abraham's, first of all, humbling himself. Let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord, I who am but dust and ashes. And then he once again moves him forward. And then a little bit later, he says, let me take it upon myself to speak to the Lord. So he's consistently reminding God that he knows that he is human, that he is not worthy of even having this conversation, much less making this request to the judge who should be making these decisions righteously. So there's a little kind of an interplay here between the fact that it is Abraham who's standing up for the righteous against God, who the assumption is the great judge and punisher. So this is interesting. The only other, let's see, the Lord was sure long on patience in responding to Abram's almost childlike queries. Yeah, yeah, that's that steadfast love and that steadfast patience that we see so often in the Psalms. It's like, yeah, 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 yeah. But I love the fact here in this whole little interaction, you get this idea as well that God can change God's mind. And not only does God and can God change God's mind, that we oftentimes can persuade the change of heart or the change of mind. Most people will point to this and say, when he finally said, okay, if there are 10 people, I will not destroy it. He says, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. So when you go and you find out that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, you say, well, hey, what about didn't you just promise if there were 10 people there that, that you would not destroy the city? So by the fact that he did destroy the city, there were not 10 righteous in the city. So the city was pretty darn bad is the point of that. But I like the fact that when we think about God changing his mind, if Abraham had quit talking after the first request, um, God wouldn't have had to change his mind more than once. But Abraham continued to talk, and every time he accepted Abraham's point or his request, God was changing his mind yet again. So there's 4 or 5 times here where God changes. It's like God's just waffling all over the place. It's like, okay, if there's 45, I won't do it. Okay, if there's 40, I won't do it. Okay, if there's 30, I won't do it. So if God were a politician here, he'd lose the election because he's not staying strict or strong on his stand. He's waffling along with whatever Abraham is asking. And why does he do that? He does it because he loves Abraham, and he loves to have this one-on-one kind of conversation and banter, and I will keep you just if you will keep me alive and give me children. So there's this kind of negotiation part going on. Okay, any questions, any comments? Okay, I'm going to go ahead then in chapter 19. And here's the great, I love this, the title of in the Lutheran study, but the depravity of Sodom. Na-na. The 2 angels came to Sodom in the evening, and Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. Okay, that already begs the question. There were 3 men, and they turned and left and went toward Sodom, and the Lord stayed to talk to Abram. Okay, so now we are discovering that these 3 men, later theology would maybe describe them as Trinitarian in form. But here now we're thinking, oh, okay, it was God and 2 of God's messengers, the angels, who came to Sodom that evening. And Lot was sitting in the gateway of Sodom. When Lot saw them, he rose to meet them and bowed down his face to the ground. He said, please, my lords, turn aside to your servant's house and spend the night and wash your feet. Then you can rise early and go on your way. Nice that he's offering the same kind of hospitality that Abraham had offered. He was raised in a good household, that Lot. They said, no, we will spend the night in the square. But Lot urged them strongly, so they turned aside to him and entered his house. And he made them a feast and baked unleavened bread, and they ate. But before they lay down, before I go into that, they ate. The angels ate. So that kind of puts a different kind of picture on angels as messengers. We've never really seen them. We don't remember, I don't think, remember seeing them in the New Testament, where when angels appear, that they're doing anything that is in any way, shape, or form related to being human. So is this the enfleshment of God or God's messengers, but they are eating, maybe just the return to the hospitality? So now we continue. But before they lay down, the men of the city, the men of Sodom, both young and old, all the people to the last man surrounded the house, and they called to Lot, "Where are the men who came to you tonight? Bring them out to us so that we may know them." Lot went out of the door to the men, shut the door after him, and said, "I beg you, my brothers, do not act so wickedly. Look, I have 2 daughters who have not known a man. Let me bring them out to you, and do to them as you please. Only do nothing to these men, for they have come under the shelter of my roof." But they replied, "Stand back." And they said, "This fellow came here as an alien, and he would play the judge. Now we will deal worse with you than with them." Then they pressed hard against the man Lot and came near the door to break it down. But the men inside reached out their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And they struck with blindness the men who were at the door of the house, both small and great, so that they were unable to find the door. Now, there's an interesting little detail that I bet you didn't remember about this story, that the angels inside struck the entire town blind so that they couldn't find the door to Lot's house. That's one way to take care of a nasty crowd. Couple of things here that I think are worthy of the conversation. And here again, it's very difficult, I think, for us to understand the code of the ancients. There were 2 things that were held more highly than almost anything else, and that was the hospitality to strangers. That was the call, because that's how people moved about. They went from place to place, and they, relied, as Tennessee Williams says, they relied on the kindness of strangers. That was the ultimate. That if you were a person of righteousness and honor in your town, your house was open to those who were coming through town for hospitality reasons. So that's primary. The secondary thing is shame and honor. Hospitality was one of the ways that you achieved honor in your community. If your house was always open, if your refrigerator was always available, if your pantry was always stocked in case someone in need would come by, then you were a person of honor. And families would do a great deal to avoid the shame of something bad befalling them. Here again, this plays into, and we're beginning to see the real foundations of what we call retributive justice. That if bad things happen to you, it's because you have not pleased God. If good things happen to you, it's because you have pleased God. So if you have something bad happening to you, it's because somewhere along the line you did something bad and you brought shame upon yourself. So making sure that your honor is upheld is just ultimate in this society. If you want to walk around town with your head raised, you do anything you can to avoid being shamed. Okay. Maybe Lot's family were the only 10 people and they were told to leave. Maybe Lot's family was the only 10 people, oh, the righteous people, and they were told to leave. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, good point, Pam, because they're going to leave because of the wickedness of the Sodomites, and they were their salvation dwelling in and amongst them. And if they had kept them and been hospitable to this alien and his family, that would have saved them, because God had already told Abraham he wouldn't destroy them if there were 10 righteous. I want you also to look back at verse 9. He says, they're taunting him. They say, "Stand back." and to Lot, stand back. And they said, this fellow came here as an alien, and he would play the judge. So immigrants and aliens have never been well accepted within communities in which righteousness has not taken hold. So let that sink in um, to what's going on around us today as far as immigrants and aliens. Um, Obviously, the men came because they wanted to have sex with the men who were in the house, the travelers, and at all costs, Lot is going to protect his house guests. I know it falls very hard on our ears um, because I guess the daughters weren't under Lot's protection. The daughters were under Lot's protection, but again, anything that he could do to keep those men away from his guests was what he was going to do, even to sacrificing his own daughters, um, so that that they might go away. And as I say, that's hard for us to hear because we value every human life. But again, in that time, daughters were dispensable, disposable. So it's an ugly story, but it points up the fact that the hospitality issue was huge in the ancient world. Um, Lloyd says, too bad they can't do that now. I'm not sure what you are referring, Lloyd. We can't do what now? Oh, maybe blinding the bad guys. I hope that's what you're talking about. So that to blind the bad crowds. Yeah. Yeah, that would be a nifty little trick to be able to do, wouldn't it? So, yeah, but then you'd have to be an angel. That's a kind of a hard role to play. So, let's just stick with the messenger part of the angels. Okay, anything else about this in this kind of ugly point that gets made? But now we're going to see how God responds. Then the men said to Lot, have you anyone else here? Sons in law, sons, daughters, or anyone you have in the city, bring them out of the place. For we are about to destroy this place because the outcry against its people has become great before the Lord, and the Lord has sent us to destroy it. So this is the men who are the angels, okay, who are talking to Lot, saying, if you've got relatives, you need to get them and get out of here because we are going to, now obviously we can't find 10 other than you guys. So up and get out of this place, for the Lord is about to destroy the city. But he seemed to his sons-in-law to be jesting. When morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, get up, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or else you will be consumed in the punishment of the city. But Lot lingered, so the men seized him and his wife and his 2 daughters by the hand, the Lord being merciful to him, and they brought him out and left him outside the city. When they had brought them outside, they said, flee for your life. Do not look back or stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the hills, or else you will be consumed. And Lot said to them, oh no, my lords, your servant has found favor with you, and you have shown me great kindness in saving my life. But I cannot flee to the hills, for fear the disaster will overtake me and I die. Look, that city is near enough to flee to, and it is a little one. Let me escape there. Is it not a little one? And my life will be saved. He said to him, very well. I grant you this favor too, and will not overthrow the city of which you have spoken. Hurry, escape there, for I can do nothing until you arrive there. Therefore, the city was called Zoar. The sun had risen on the earth when Lot came to Zoar. And Zoar in my footnote says, in Hebrew, that means little, the little town. One of the things that just hit me as I was reading this, at the beginning, when the men start to warn Lot and say, get your relatives, get all of your relatives, your sons-in-laws, your daughters, sons, anybody else you have in the city, and bring them out of the place. So Lot goes out and says to his sons-in-laws who were to marry his daughters, which means that those 2 daughters he had were betrothed. to these two men, already considered sons-in-law, which, maybe that actually justified a little bit of him offering his daughters, since the sons-in-law would have been responsible for them. And if they didn't want that to happen, the sons-in-law should have been the ones to protect the daughters. So that's kind of a secondary line that helps that a little bit, I guess, but still very hard to hear. Um, so, and then they get their comeuppance because they don't take him seriously. They think he's just fooling around, and they miss the boat, you know. So they're running, they're getting ready to leave, just Lot and his wife and the two daughters. And he says, I can't go out into the plain because there I'll die. So he asks for the solace um, of sanctuary in a little city called Zoar. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. And he overthrew those cities and all the plain and all the inhabitants of the cities and what grew on the ground. But Lot's wife behind him looked back, and she became a pillar of salt. Abraham went early in the morning to the place where he had stood before the Lord, and he looked down toward Sodom and Gomorrah and toward all the land of the plain, and saw the smoke of the land going up like the smoke of a furnace. So it was that when God destroyed the cities of the plain, God remembered Abraham and sent Lot out of the midst of the overthrow, when he overthrew the cities in which Lot had settled. Now Lot went up to Zoar, went up out of Zoar and settled in the hills with his two daughters, for he was afraid to stay in Zoar. So he lived in a cave with his two daughters. And the firstborn said to the younger, Our father is old, and there is not a man on earth to come in to us after the manner of all the world. Come, let us make our father drink wine, and we will lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night, and the firstborn went in and lay with her father. He did not know when she lay down or when she rose. On the next day, the firstborn said to the younger, Look, I lay last night with my father. Let us make him drink wine tonight also. Then you go in and lie with him, so that we may preserve offspring through our father. So they made their father drink wine that night also, and the younger rose and lay with him, and he did not know when she lay down or when she rose. Thus both the daughters of Lot became pregnant by their father. The firstborn bore a son and named him Moab. He is the ancestor of the Moabites to this day. The younger also bore a son and named him Ben-Ami. He is the ancestor of the Ammonites to this day. Okay, so these are Transjordan people. And there's a note here in the Lutheran Study Bible. Ruth, whose descendants include David and Jesus, comes from the line of Moab. So one of the discussion questions here I think is wonderful. It says, how can God bring blessing from even the worst of family situations? And you see it, in just this little bit of Abraham and Sarah's story, that God continues to bring blessing even to people who don't behave very well. When you think about Abraham and Sarah and in their sojourning, Abraham has consistently tried to pass Sarah off as his sister rather than his wife, and then that gets him into trouble, but then they get out of that, and then, it's like, whenever people try to take things into their own hands, and not comply with how God has called them into to guide them through the world, they get into trouble. But even though Lot and Abraham, when they split and went to two different areas of the land in which to settle, Lot finds himself even in the place that was the most fertile and looked to be the best choice, because of his, I don't know when to say greediness, but he had an elderly uncle who should have gotten the best land, who should have, as the elder in the family, received the best part. And so Lot took it for himself. And you can see then how his life unfolds just in that action of choosing the better of the two halves for himself rather than giving it to Abraham. Um, and then, but even so, God continues to bless Abraham and his lineage in that he saves Lot and his two daughters out of the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So God has drawn them out, and Lot then becomes the father of these two great races of people um, who will become also great in the land as far as having land and prosperity alongside both Isaac and Ishmael's children in that area will be, the different lines of the tribes that will come, the tribes of Israel. Um, so let's see. We got about 10 minutes. I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit more since I don't have any comments in here. I'm going to go ahead and read the beginning of, well, the entire chapter 20. This won't take long. From there, Abraham journeyed toward the region of the Negeb and settled between Kadesh and Shur. While residing in Gerar as an alien, Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Here we go again. And King Abimelech of Gerar sent and took Sarah. But God came to Abimelech in a dream by night and said to him, "You are about to die because of the woman whom you have taken, for she is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not approached her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent people? Did he not himself say to me, 'She is my sister'?" And she herself said, "He is my brother." I did this in the integrity of my heart and the innocence of my hands. Then God said to him in a dream, "Yes, I know that you did this in the integrity of your heart. Furthermore, it was I who kept you from sinning against me. Therefore, I did not let you touch her. Now then, return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you shall live. But if you do not restore her, know that you shall surely die, you and all that are yours." So Abimelech rose early in the morning and called all his servants and told them all these things. And the men were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham and said to him, "What have you done to us? How have I sinned against you that you have brought such great guilt on me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that ought not to be done." And Abimelech said to Abraham, "What were you thinking of that you did this thing?" Abraham said, "I did it because I thought, 'There is no fear of God at all in this place, and they will kill me because of my wife. Besides, she is indeed my sister, the daughter of my father, but not the daughter of my mother, and she became my wife.' And then God caused me to wander from my father's house, and I said to her, 'This is the kindness you must do me. At every place to which we come, say of me, He is my brother.' Then Abimelech took sheep and oxen and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham and restored his wife Sarah to him. Abimelech said, 'My land is before you. Settle where it pleases you.' To Sarah he said, 'Look, I have given your brother 1,000 pieces of silver. It is your exoneration before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated.' Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, and also healed his wife and family slaves, so that they bore children. For the Lord had closed fast all the wombs of the house of Abimelech because of Sarah, Abraham's wife." So, this is an interesting a little twist of fate, and I always wonder why they waited to tell us that the Lord had actually taken some steps against Abimelech, even though it said he kept him from, victimizing Sarah and the situation. So interesting interplay here between a similar kind of situation that they had with Sarah and Pharaoh early on in the story. And I would suspect, I don't know this for sure, but I would suspect that that story was probably was probably a different strand, because here now we also have God being called God at this end of the story with this particular little story. So I would suspect, in fact, it'll take a minute if I can find it. Um, just a moment. My fingers are not working very quickly. Um, yep, it's in chapter 12, around 10 and on. We are in the E strand there, Elohim, where God is known as the Lord. So we have this encounter between Abram and Sarah in Abram and Sarai in Egypt, and that is, pretty much the Lord. That's the Elohist strand. And so then when we get here into this little story about Abimelech, this is a different strand. So that kind of story may have pre-existed. It may have been an oral story, and then each of the strands of authors chose to deal with that story maybe in two separate ways, in two different parts of their storytelling. Or it's very possible that the story happened twice, because Sarah does say, you told me from the very beginning, when we go into a new place, to claim you as my brother rather than my husband. So, but just possibilities. And I mean, if you wanted to really go deep into scholarly work and how they put the stories together, you might see how, this could have been a core story that was written by two different strands of authorship, and dealt with it in a different way for a different purpose in moving the story along. So again, doesn't make it not true. Just, all the stories are true. Some of them even happened, and some of them even happened the way we think they happened. So that's part of the of really digging into this, to these texts and having these conversations. Because the question really would be, what does that matter to you? Does it matter that the story is told twice in two different ways? Does it matter? Does this need to be one story? And which one of them is right? Is that something that you want to find out? So the questions that come up from these kinds of things that we're doing as we look at the literary context and who the author might be and what their purpose might have been, we come up with stories of our own, or questions of our own, that help us define how we encounter stories in different places. I'm seeing something jump in here. Sarah is supposed to be old, but she sure has it going on. That's true. It's supposed to be absolutely gorgeous, so beautiful that she would just get him into trouble whenever they went someplace, because she was so beautiful. Guys would just be, wanting to take her away. And poor Abraham, we all have our cross to bear. Poor Abraham had to deal with the fact that his wife was beautiful. Tough stuff. Okay, so we will start then. I'm going to, give you a 5-minute recess here. We're going to start next week with the birth of Isaac. That will be on the 16th. And then we're really going to get into the patriarchy and the whole Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, the whole patriarchal strand of sons and sons and sons. And then we'll get down to the 12 tribes. And then we'll move to all kinds of other fun stuff. So, so mark your book we will start on the 21st chapter of Genesis next time. And I will hope to see you all in conversations. Oh, by the way, if you are part of the group of those who are working on the Waking Up White book, which meets usually on Thursday nights at 7, we're going to meet at 6:30. This time, don't forget, and I will send you another Zoom invitation. If you'd like to be in on that group, you can join anytime. And you need to let me know, and I'll send you that invitation. So have a great rest of the day. This afternoon would be a wonderful time for a walk if you're a walker, because it's nice and cool, and you can smell the air, and it's still pretty quiet out there. So have a wonderful day. Stay safe, and I will see you next week, or you will see me whenever you tune in to one of these Bible study, book study, morning devotions, or worship on Sunday. See you then. Love you, miss you. God bless.